have another panel that will discuss a part of our national moment and then turn it over to you for some small group discussion this afternoon. We did large group discussion this morning, and we'll do some small group work this afternoon. So Patrick Rivera, Diana Hancharenko, you've already met this morning, our wonderful MCs. And they're joined by Dr. Tracy Lamont, who is a professor at Loyola University in New Orleans. And they are going to talk about Beyond the Buzzwords. And so you turn it over to them to lead us through this discussion. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Nick. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us after lunch here. And those that have just arrived, welcome. I think we got a couple new faces in the room. Like Nick said, I'm Tracy Lamont, and I work at the Loyola Institute for Ministry at Loyola University in New Orleans. And so I'm assistant professor of religious education there. And we are going to present today sort of our context. So I'm going to present kind of what these buzzwords are in just a minute. You'll see a few of them. I'm going to present kind of my context from that, which is just from the point of view of teaching ministers and religious educators, and how they kind of grapple with these words from sort of like from our classes and from their writing. And then we're also joined today by Diana Hancharenko, who is young adult minister at St. Marici Parish in Youngstown, Ohio. So she's going to give us kind of the parish perspective of that. So I'll give the university perspective, my university perspective. It's not everybody's. She's going to give her parish perspective on these words and terms that we keep hearing. And then we have Patrick Rivera, who is from the Office for Young Adult Ministry in the Diocese of San Diego. I always want to say San Francisco, so I had to look down and say San Diego. Sorry. Didn't mean to throw any shade there. So he's going to give a diocesan perspective on what, kind of these words are that we keep hearing and keep throwing around. So that's how we're going to set it up today, is just provide our context and where these words have meaning and where we know folks struggle with terminology. So I give it over to you, Patrick.
Yeah, so the context for the title, Beyond the Buzzwords. So in May or April, I can never remember. May. From now on, when I bring up the summit, it was in May. Got it now. In May, we had a summit, also part of the Young Adult Advisory Team for the USCCB in Washington, D.C. And one of my close friends, some of y'all might know him, Stephen Lewis, he sent me, one person. Good for you, Luke. Good job. He sent me I guess after the first day, he went back to this hotel or to this room where he was staying, and then created something that he sent out to me and a few others to kind of get a laugh out of. And it was pretty much the reality of a lot of these meetings we have. And so I present to you the bingo card of buzzwords. Now, if we just look at those words, these are words that come up throughout every conversation, every diocesan, every national, regional thing. We begin with the A1, encounter. We move our way down. B1, Gen Z. V, the fifth encuentro. Divine renovation. Social media. No silver bullet. The synod. Engage. Rebuilt. Comfort zone. Accompaniment. Evangelicarium. Millennials. That's a free space, by the way. Margins and peripheries. Vocation. Young church. Sons and daughters of the light. Sherry Waddell. Technical difficulties. Introvert. Immigration. What they're doing in Africa. Going, gone. Dialogue, and meet them where they're at. So, now Stephen Lewis's intention might have been to be slightly facetious, which it was. And it was quite funny at the time, and it made me laugh because we really could have played an entire bingo game throughout that discussion. Everyone's taking pictures. Great. You can follow Steve at Steve the Missionary. He recently left us as the ministry and has taken that nonprofit route. So, anyways, this is where we got our talk from. This is really just kind of where we decided to throw that title as Beyond the Buzzwords, because these are buzzwords that we hear so much, but they mean so many different things to different people in different areas of ministry. And so when we talk on a national level, or even just a global level, we have to recognize that there are differences to the realities in which we are a part of. Maybe you're part of a diocese that has a youth and young adult combination office. Maybe you're a coordinator. Maybe you're a volunteer. Maybe you're a diocese that has a full-time diocesan director and an office just for young adults. Or maybe you're at a parish as a volunteer, as a paid person, as a stipend person. Or maybe you're a nonprofit. Maybe you work in campus ministry. Maybe you fundraise. Maybe you're a doctor. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, these words are going to have different approaches that you will take within instituting and bringing them forth. So this kind of, I would say, it goes from the monological thought process to the dialogical, which is young adult ministry. Amen? Amen. So I'll pass it back to you, Tracy.
That was a good introduction to that. Thanks, Patrick. So in terms of my context, I'm going to run you through really briefly what it is that I do. I've encountered a lot of people. I'm going to throw out encounter. Get it?
I hope everyone brought their daubers. We should have put that on the list.
Right? Check them off, yeah. And so I encounter a lot of people that think like, oh, you work for a university, you have no idea what's going on in ministry. And I was like, I hope that's not the case because I teach ministers. I have to absolutely have a pulse on what's happening. And so our program is practical theology. And there's kind of two ways of thinking of practical theology. One is that you just kind of apply theology. So break it open and help it apply to your ministry and to your lives. But the other side, the one that I work more deeply in, is really finding within, like cracking open the ministerial experience, your personal context, who you are in ministry, breaking that open for its sacred dimension and for its theological context, because living in praxis, reflecting on your ministry and conversation with others and conversation with God and your relationship with God is theological. So that work itself that's being done can be named in certain ways. And so then from there, then we explore, the Christian tradition, the truths of the faith and things like that. And so instead of just applying theology, we're finding where theology is actually running in people's lives. And so often I find with my students, a lot of times it's in their writing, where they are just describing these ways of engaging students in the classroom or engaging young adults or engaging youth as ministers, and whatever their context is in campus ministry, wherever it is. Their ways of doing that, I'm thinking to myself, so we'll read these documents. We'll read documents from the Pope and about encounter, accompaniment, missionary discipleship, and what it looks like. And then all of a sudden you go through their writing, and they're saying these ways of accompanying people, but they're not using that word. And so sometimes from my perspective, I'm finding that their lived experience and what they're actually doing concretely in their ministry reflects encounter. Like they have encountered people on the margins. They have gone outside of their parish walls to make sure that, like to have coffee with somebody and say, is there anything the church can do for you? Can we just talk about your faith? Can we just talk about your life? And I was like, so you're accompanying that person? And they're like, oh, that's fancy. And I was like, so that's a really great word that we're hearing from, and some of my students have no idea that what they're doing is actually encounter accompaniment. They are actually acting like missionary disciples by the fruits of their lives. And so we heard a lot about that this morning. And then, a lot of other times we talk about the call to holiness, and especially through Rejoice and Be Glad, the Pope's most recent encyclical, and how everyday holiness is, these ways of being missionary disciples, these ways of, accompanying others. And they don't know any of that. I said, how did you talk with your neighbor this morning, like just your next door neighbor? And they said, well, they were having a bad day, so I tried to uplift them. I said, that's bringing the joy of God in their life. You didn't have to say the word God, and they said it wasn't a religious conversation. And I said, but you still journeyed with that person in their life. And that's what accompaniment to us, to some of us means, and then the other side, and I'll be done with my context. The other side of it is those that do not know what the terms mean, those that really do, a lot of my students that want to, really believe the next program is going to be the one, and to sort of kind of crack open for them, just through their writing, I say, who have you talked to about that program? What young people are on your side? I had an email, and this is a quick example, an email from a student who wasn't in my class at the time, she's still in our program, and she wrote me an email and she said, we are just having a turnover in confirmation and in young adult ministry, and they're just, the pastor has given us the green light, go run with it. She goes, what program works? And I was like, so I've got a couple ideas for you. One of which is maybe I said there's a million programs out there, and I said and they all have content that speaks to the Christian tradition. You can absolutely find a program and it will work. I said, or this is an opportunity to engage the parents in your community in dialogue. What do they want in faith formation for young people and for young adults. I said, and get the young people and young adults on your planning team to decide where to go from there. I said, and then ask more people out from there, and then create leadership from there, and then you tell me what program you formed, you know? And she was like, that was what was in my heart, but I just didn't know how to put it together, you know? So we work on these models and just kind of, but without ever telling them that's what it is. It emerges from what they're doing, if that makes sense. And so I see a very emergent model with this language. So it can become such a buzzword, but if you really crack open what people are saying and doing, you find out that it's in their language, it's in their ministries. And sometimes they just need to be kind of shaped in that direction to name what it is they're doing and to cling to it, you know? So from my perspective, that's what I see with my students. So I'll give it to Diana from a parish perspective. How do these words come out for you?
Well, from a parish perspective, I think it's really interesting because, you know, we toss these words around, especially when we're in meetings like this, when we're amongst colleagues, when we're amongst other, you know, ministry professionals. But this isn't something that I'm going to kind of go and throw around if I'm at a meeting or if I'm talking to somebody in our community. But it's really interesting because I think sometimes, especially us as a field, we put so much emphasis on these words that, yes, we do kind of lose the meaning. We do kind of lose the context. And I think that we think if we group them in just the right word setting, it's going to be the magic words to find the perfect program that we so much desire. But I think, you know, one of the things, I was really inspired. I was recently at a talk in Cleveland, Ohio, and Father Frank Donio was the presenter. Shout out to you, Father Frank. And he really captured what I was feeling about these buzzwords. And he said they'll learn the words if they understand the meaning. And that really hit me because, you know, we talk so much about missionary discipleship, and we talk so much about encounter. We talk so much about accompaniment. And we think that somehow that, like, if we do it just right, the word is going to appear in neon flashing lights that we finally hit the jackpot. And the moments are far more subtle than that. And they're going to look different for me in a parish in Youngstown, Ohio versus Patrick versus, you know, wherever you are. And I think sometimes that we get so busy looking for, you know, the forest between the trees, you know, looking for this, that we're missing really key, important moments in our own communities. And I think that can be very limiting. I think that can be, you know, kind of almost diminishing to the great work that we're doing because we're expecting it to look a certain way. And I know that that's always a learning process. That's always a growing process. It's just kind of, we always want to be better, but yet at the same time, it's so important for us to pause and to recognize God where he is and how present he already is in our communities and in our different contexts. So I was actually, you know, as I was looking at these, there was a couple that, you know, really stood out to me, and one that was, I mean, there's a few that are missing too. I'm sure we can all have our own version of bingo cards. Maybe for the next forum we can just have a bingo night. But the one that I was really kind of struck by was the no silver bullet, because that's one I use a lot because it's true. And also just the fact that we say that we know that there's no silver bullet. I know, like, I've said that to people, and they're like, oh, yeah, I know. But then in so many other words, they're asking for the silver bullet. You know, now I think that's changed to best practices. And you know, it was just fascinating to me because it's like, you know, we don't want the silver bullet, but we want bullet points. We want to know the secret formula. We want to know, you know, what works and things like that. So I think sometimes we kind of dance around those. And I think that this is really a time when you look at these words to be honest about what you're looking for. Best practices in its true sense, idea sharing, you know, hearing something creative from somebody else is absolutely fantastic, and that's necessary, and it's important that we share and be creative and get those things out. However, when I hear that idea, I have to think about, yes, I love this idea, it's wonderful, it's fabulous. What am I going to do with it, and is there some version of it, some way that I can tailor it back at my parish, St. Angela Merici in Youngstown, Ohio? Because, you know, it's not one size fits all, and that's okay. And we don't all have to look the same, and we don't all have to have the same exact stuff running around in in our dioceses and our parishes and things like that. So I think sometimes, though, it's like, are we really, when we throw these terms out there, are we really understanding what we're saying? Are we really understanding that it is supposed to look different from one place to another? And are we patient with each other? And are we acting judgy toward other people if they tell us how they modified or what one of these words means to them? So I think these are just really important things to kind of keep in mind, as we're kind of processing all of this information. As these words are going to pop up over and over and over again, what do they mean to you? Patrick.
Awesome. Thank you for that, both of you. It's funny because I can pinpoint and recognize different areas in my own formation and discernment as a young adult where I've kind of been in both places. As a collegiate missionary, I can see kind of that academic approach. Also, as a former lay pastoral associate, I can see that, and I agree with you, Diana. These words are words that we might use here, but don't really get utilized much on the parish level unless you're doing a divine renovation or you're doing Sherry Waddell stuff or whatnot, and you have that as your signature, whatever you are. You already got all of those? Bingo.
Yeah, you got it.
In the Diocese of San Diego, it was a unique situation that I was presented in when I started in the office. The office before had just a part-time young adult director who did a remarkable amount of good work in her time as a part-time 20-hour-a-week director. And then when the bishop made it a full-time position, and I got the gig, so to speak, came into it with basically the understanding that we would grow the office eventually to now we have 4 staff members and we continue to grow, and we have full-time parish ministry leaders that are full-time parish employees that work at the parishes. One of them, Bridget Lynch, who's here with us, and she'll be speaking tomorrow about that a little bit. Recognizing how fast we've grown and trying to go back and think about what it was that we did unique, or what it was that within these buzzwords that actually allowed that to happen. And really, I would almost say that the buzzwords didn't matter. What we essentially did was we spent time with people. And I've said this before, but Jesus Christ took 12 men camping for 3 years and changed the world. Amen? So for us, it was, for me, from the very beginning, I actually didn't even read Sons and Daughters of the Light until just before, so this is, I'd been in the office for 2 years, just before the first forum, or the forum in 2016 in San Jose. I was like, oh, what is this all about? I should probably read this document. And it was like sitting on my desk when I got to the position. But I just knew that inside, the main thing that the bishop had really tasked me with doing was just to go out and meet people, just to go out and encounter. And so spending time with the pastors, spending time with the priests, that's how I encountered people. Spending time with them to then find out who their leaders were how I began to accompany people. And then when the office expanded, we were able to get an associate director and then a coordinator for campus ministry. And as it continued to grow, and then we had our pastoral juvenile director, as we continued to do these things, the basis of all of that has been really looking at the buzzwords and defining them as they approach our own outreach and ministry. Because just as we hear from St. Paul says, I can see you're a holy people. You have all these gods and all these shrines and temples. I'm here to proclaim that God to you, the true God, the God of the unknown temple, the unknown shrine. So many young adults in our ministry that we've come across who recognize that their ultimate concern is their God, whatever that ultimate concern is, whether it's sports, whether it's money, whether it's sex, it could be many different things. And so for us, it's mainly a way in which we send ourselves out to reach and proclaim the unknown God to them. And we do that by walking alongside them and sharing the faith in such a way that the buzzwords, they don't matter. They don't come into play, because what does come into play is the buzzwords within their own conversations and their own peace and their own hearts. I was with a friend of mine recently who was sharing with me about different people that were involved in this forum, and he was talking about witness and encounter and testimony. And I offer this as kind of a closing point before we go a little deeper, because I could talk a long time about the Diocese of San Diego, and I don't want to do that, and how we kind of got to where we are, or any of that stuff. But he was sharing with me one of the coolest stories he'd heard was about Bishop Caggiano and something Bishop Caggiano had said. Shout out to him, because we did a shout out. You did a shout out to someone else.
Yeah.
So I'll do a shout out to Bishop Caggiano. I think he left the room, so it's not really a shout out.
No, he's here.
He's
He's right down
Oh,
there.
oh, there he is. Yes. Right. I'll keep talking. But so anyway, so he shared a story about him. So I went home and I was telling my wife, Margot, who's from South Philly. And if you know anything about Italian area, very, very proud Italian area. We live in San Diego, and she has a hard time with it. We'll just put it that way. She misses the East Coast. And this friend was telling me about a thing Bishop Caggiano did, like Catholics of New York, Italians of New York, or some YouTube clip that they. I brought it up and I said, oh my gosh, Margot would love this. I'm gonna have to show it to Margot. And I showed it to her. And this just once again reiterates the importance of stories and meeting people where they are and understanding who they are. As Margot was watching this video, it's a 2 or 3 minute video about what Italians experienced in New York growing up, I was watching her watch it, and then all of a sudden she was like, I can't, and she just started crying. Because it struck such a significant chord in her heart because she recognized in the story and in the video of how the traditions and rituals and all the practices of the Italian culture in New York, how true those were to her and her upbringing in South Philly, and how much she missed those. And the beautiful part about that is that's everyone's story. We all have a place that we feel entirely comfortable, that is truly our home, that we can think about that place. And I believe that if we step aside a little bit from the buzzwords, and if we go and we meet people where they are in that place, then the words, as Father Frank said, and the meanings will then come into play. Mm-hmm. Margot afterwards was very frustrated that we were in San Diego after she saw that video, just to put it out there. But it was a beautiful reminder to me that that's exactly how in diocesan ministry, where there's 100 parishes in our diocese, where there's more priests, and it can be challenging sometimes, where there's deacons and when there's volunteers and when there's youth ministers and young adult ministers and all these different things, all these titles and stuff, at the end of the day, we all have our unique, very real story. And if we reach out, starting with my office, when I reached out to leaders, I reached out to Bridget, I got to know Bridget Lynch. Bridget reached out to the young adults at Poway and the St. Michael's Parish, and now she has one of the largest young adult parishes in San Diego. And it was because she spent time getting to know their stories.
So I think we're going to move into, we do have a question that we want to pose for small group discussion at your tables. I think ultimately the goal of what we're looking to do is to really move into action and to think about what might be, holding us back, what sort of understanding do we have of things, and how are we really working with it. And I think sometimes just throwing around big buzzwords without understanding your personal context can act as kind of a good shield. So we need to break that down so we can really put these words and change them into being action and action steps to further, young adult ministry in our church. So the question, which buzzwords resonate with your ministerial experience? And which words are you still trying to find meaning in? So we really hope that this is a time where you can kind of reflect on that a little bit and talk about, kind of your buzzword stories and what's meaningful to you and where you, maybe something you would like to learn a little bit more about and apply to your personal context. So we'd like to allow you the next few minutes to share at your tables and to just begin to process this question. So, and we'll call you back when we're ready.
We'll go back to the slide so you guys can see all the buzzwords again.
Yeah.
And you can get up and take pictures if you want to share it. Just credit Steve Lewis, not me.
Yeah. So please go ahead
Please
and
go ahead
begin
and
your
take-
discussions.
All right, we're going to call everyone back if you don't mind. I hate to cut anybody off. We're going to move into our next session, but before we do, we would really love to hear from anyone, any volunteers. We would love to hear any conversations you had about this. How do these words come alive for you, and how do these words become a challenge, and are there other words that you're hearing? So I just invite anybody, stand up. We've got some mics.
Yeah, I think there's another mic roaming around somewhere.
There's one.
So do any tables want to share? Just a couple tables share one or two
Just some
things?
quick insights. Don't all jump at once.
Or things you talked about maybe?
Well, he's standing right here. Our table talked a little bit about the idea of margins and peripheries and how that can become very subjective very quickly. It tended to kind of launch after the convocation last summer. But it all depends on who's talking about what the margin is and how people feel marginalized. And the context of, is that economic, is that race, is that gender, in so many ways you could find different, and every ministry wants to feel like they're ministering to people on the margins, but a lot of times we're talking about a lot of different people marginalized for a lot of different reasons. So we just thought that could be confusing very quickly.
That's great, thank you.
No.
I'm the official disruptor
Yay! Uh-oh.
at the table. Because I must confess, this list convicted me, as I shared with my fellows here. It convicted me because if these are our buzzwords, there's not a single word up there that came out of the mouth of Jesus.
Wow, yeah.
Okay? And so I think it still convicts me, which means all those words, there's nothing wrong with them, but then there's something that may be underneath that we have to kind of rediscover. And we started talking about what that underneath may be. And we asked the question, when you encounter the Lord Jesus, what changes? And it's nothing that he asks of you, it's what he gives, that you experience that you are loved even when you're a mess. And I just wondered to myself, that's something we should think about.
Thank you.
Yeah. I was wondering, just like everyone else, if he was hiring too, so don't worry. I was on the same page as you guys.
Maybe one more over in the corner.
We had a really interesting end note. We were talking about words up there that concern us, and it was brought up the going, going, gone. And so then we got into a discussion about when you do accompany people and you do meet them where they're at, and how when we meet people where they're at, if they sense or think that we have a mission to draw them back into the church or back into the pews, that we're really dooming ourselves. We're not doing like Jesus did and just accompanying them or being with them just because we love them and we care about them. And so if they sense that we've got this agenda, like I just want to get you back into your pew, they're still going to be going, going, gone.
Yeah, thank you.
Take one more.
Okay, sure, one more. If we can. Thanks, Michael, for passing the mic around.
I'm a verbal processor, so I may not have formed my question until it starts coming out, but I struggle a little bit or wrestle with the word accompaniment. I've been doing youth ministry, young adult ministry for nearly 20 years and was trained outside the Catholic Church in how to do that. And a lot of these buzzwords pop up and it's like, oh, that's a way to describe what we've been doing. And so that a little bit of we talked about missionary discipleship, and it's like, well, it's almost weird because a disciple is a missionary, right? So anyway, the word accompaniment I struggle with because the way I picture accompaniment is it's like somebody brought somebody to the dance, but it's not like they're really together, they just kind of brought them there. Does that make sense, like the word accompaniment? So and that's really natural for a 43-year-old hanging out with 25-year-olds. I'm accompanying them, I get that. But I want to be with them. And so I feel that word kind of takes away a little bit of what Jesus did. I mean, Jesus put skin on, right? He moved into our neighborhood. He became one with us, not just hung out with us. So I kind of struggle with that word, and how do we move that to be more of a, we're in this together.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for that.
I thought that was brilliant. That was great. No, just to speak into that, we when I said that monological, dialogical, I used to do this analogy when I would do youth ministry and help out with youth of like a ladder. And I would pull out the biggest ladder the church had. And I would walk up the ladder, and I'd say, imagine this ladder is your prayer life. Imagine you take one step up, you're a little closer to God because you prayed this. Or you went to confession, so you're here. Or you went, to daily mass with your grandma, so now you're 3 steps up. And then you messed up. Then there was this girl, and then this, and this, and this party. And I bounce up and down a ladder for like 5 minutes. And I get down, and I'll say, that's exhausting. literally and spiritually. And I think that's the word, that's the way in which we sometimes approach ministry, as if we get to know these words, if we have this stuff all stored in our bag of tricks, we'll get closer and closer up the ladder, when in reality, the word became flesh. Like Christ isn't at the top of the ladder, he's here right now. And so the words have just ways in which we kind of forget that. Like, where is Jesus on that, you know? How is that a part of the reality of our lives now in ministry? Like, accompaniment is just, it's a word. But the Bible has many other words in which Jesus utilized in his teachings that we just need to live.
Okay. All right. Well, we are going to, we're finished with this part of it. No other way to say it. Drops mic. No.